People have options. They can go to different places. They can vote with their feet. Is that what you're saying?
America is still probably the best. We're watching it trend down, and that is very depressing. Versus going to El Salvador, which is nowhere near as good as America is today. But there's this air of hope. There's this air of growth.
Voices in the world on crypto, on the economy, on freedom. Today, with his brand new radio show, Mark Moss joins me to talk about totalitarianism in Australia, the ban of Bitcoin in China, and what's happening with opportunities in El Salvador, Puerto Rico, and beyond. Plus, would he keep his U.S. citizenship? It's a no-hold-barred conversation right now with Mark Moss on Nomad Capitalist. Mark Moss, welcome to Nomad Capitalist. Good to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andrew. I'm really happy to be here. A big fan.
Congratulations on the new radio show, iHeartRadio, syndicated across the United States. This is deja vu for me, my old business. So congratulations on that. I wanted to ask you, because you said something that I think I agree with. You said we're not going to vote our way out of tyranny with everything that's happening right now in the world, personally and financially. What does that mean to you?
Well, unfortunately, if anybody's kind of halfway paying attention, I think they've probably realized there's very big problems with the voting system. It used to be, other countries, and now it appears to be in the United States. And so I think, was there some sort of election tampering? Was there not? Maybe, maybe not. It's hard to say. There's definitely evidence there could be. But I think at the end of the day, what bothers me is that this would be very easy to fix. Like, all you have to do is have one person from both sides in there watching. It's very easy to fix. The fact that they don't want to makes me think there's something to hide. And unfortunately, democracy is kind of this mob rule. And so if we want, if we want to get what we want, I don't think voting is going to work. We're going to have to find another way.
I saw recently Switzerland, which has this very democratic referendum system, voted by a large margin to legalize same-sex marriage, as I recall. And I thought to myself, is that something that the majority should be voting on? To me, that's what the tyranny is about, because haven't we seen how most people want to trade freedom for safety, want everyone else to pay the bill, but not pay the bill themselves? That's what I see in the Western world right now.
Definitely. And then we saw what happened just in Canada last week with the election there with Trudeau, and we have the minority is ruling, right? The minority has voted for this, but they're ruling the majority. And so it's kind of the tyranny that people are under. And I mean, to the point, even just that example that you just gave, why is the government telling who can get married in the first place? I've been rereading Frederick Bastiat's book, The Law, and he talks about the law is there to protect private property rights. Right? That's what the initial role of the government's for. And so, why are they telling who can get married and who can't in the first place? It's kind of interesting.
Do you think the fact that the government already controls these areas, people have said that's okay with us, that's the way it should be. How do you come back from that?
Well, I think it's very easy for anyone that's paying attention to see that the world is trending towards this authoritarianism or totalitarianism or whatever you want to call it, where they basically want to control every area of your life. And it's not just being observed, it's being told to us by the likes of the World Economic Forum and so forth, that they would really want to control every aspect of your life. And so if the world is trending that way, what changes that trend? Do the leaders wake up one day and say, we have too much control, let's give some freedom back? Because I don't think that's going to happen. We have technology moving in a way that's going to enable them to kind of create this perfect prison for us that could be very difficult to break out of. And so really the only way that I see this trend of authoritarianism or totalitarianism going or breaking is through competition. It's the only way.
People have options. They can go to different places. They can vote with their feet. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, our vote with the machine doesn't count so much, but our vote with our feet and the vote with our money, right? And those are the two things that I think will really affect change. If enough people leave an oppressive regime, they'll be forced to reconsider. And we've seen this in real time just in the United States recently. California and New York, the two strictest states and the most heavily taxed states in the nation, have been outcompeted by the likes of Texas and Florida. Both governors found their jobs on the chopping block. One lost, one hasn't yet, but they have been outcompeted. And it's kind of a peaceful protest, if you will. But imagine if this starts working on a global level, where all kind of a Atlas Shrugged, Galt's Gulch type of situation, where the productive people leave those countries to go to other countries because they're more open, they're more free, more competitive. That competition will force those countries to finally change.
Go where you're treated best, as someone once said.
Yeah, go where you're treated best. I know you say that all the time. I've kind of built my investing career off put my money where it's treated best, but they kind of fit hand in hand.
Yeah, I remember growing up, in addition to learning go where you're treated best, my father would always say, capital is fungible. It doesn't have to stay in one place. Politicians don't realize that. You moved to Puerto Rico, I assume in part because of the tax incentives in Puerto Rico. What do you like about living in Puerto Rico? What do you not like about living there?
Well, so I'm from Southern California. I'm a surfer. We travel all over the world surfing, and so being somewhere near the beach that I could surf was going to be important to me. I think, unfortunately, the way the world is today, there's probably nowhere you can go to have it all. So it's important for people to kind of understand what are those things they want to optimize for. And so for me, having a beach was super important. Being an American citizen and having to pay American federal taxes, no matter where I go in the world, I don't have a lot of options either if I really want to lower that tax bill. So that kind of narrowed my window as well. And so Puerto Rico seemed like a great place. It had a very attractive tax structure, to say the least. It's a beautiful island in the Caribbean. The weather's amazing. It's places I take vacations on a regular basis. The ocean, the water is amazing. It's still America, or part of America, territory of America. The infrastructure is great compared to a lot of places that I travel to for surfing typically. So it kind of checked most of the boxes.
What is it about people in the crypto space? It seems a lot of surfers. Is there a connection, crypto surfing?
I don't know if there's a connection, but what I would say is that I think anybody that's attracted to it is an out-of-the-box thinker, and more importantly, I think they're really driven by freedom. At least for me, I consider myself a freedom maximalist, and so they're driven by freedom of choice. I have the right to choose what I want to put my money into. I have the right to choose what I want to use as a medium of exchange or a store of value. And so maybe it's just that drive, that shared ethos of freedom, possibly, or adventure.
Is it a risk tolerance? I mean, I watch some of these guys out there surfing. I get anxiety just watching it. Is that part of it?
Well, there's definitely risk tolerance for sure. I recently was down in El Salvador where they just made Bitcoin legal tender. I took a team down there with the project I'm working on, and I had about 10 or 12 people, and they all wanted to go surfing. So I was like, all right, I'll take everybody out surfing. And the waves were small. It was beginner waves. It was more difficult than I would like for beginners, but still beginner level. And they all had these like near-death experiences. They said, we have crisis bonding. We've all almost died. Now we're like a good team together. It was funny.
There is something to that. Puerto Rico versus Southern California, where you said you're from. When you go between those places, what's the contrast that you see? One place that is perhaps out of necessity, has lowered taxes for Americans. One place that wants to raise them. What's the contrast?
Yeah, well, Puerto Rico went bankrupt, and what's interesting, the contrast is that typically, like California, when nations or countries start going broke, they try to squeeze the remaining people even harder. When Puerto Rico went broke, they decided to encourage, again, competition, encourage people to come over and start businesses. And so there's that. But there's different dynamics here. I mean, obviously, some of the local people aren't super fans of it, although personally, I've never witnessed any problems with that. But one of the errors that I do see here is that because it is attracting all these wealth creators, a lot of crypto, Bitcoin people, a lot of internet marketers, investors, which is kind of the three of my niches combined. And when you meet people, there's this instant connection. Oh, what brought you here? What do you do? Can we be friends? And it's very easy to meet people, grow your network, as opposed to living, in California where everybody's busy, everybody's in their own life, and nobody really has time to make new friends.
You think California is worse for networking than Puerto Rico?
Well, for those three niches where I have that intersection, I would say Puerto Rico has probably better networking than most places. Probably better than anywhere besides Austin and maybe Miami, but probably behind Austin, I would say.
That's pretty important, I think. I mean, if you're trying to start a business, a lot of people really like that networking ability to share ideas, especially in the crypto space. I mean, that is very valuable. You've also said, though, I mean, the U.S. government is pushing back, and they could certainly drag Puerto Rico into this. They're sticking stuff in legislation to increase financial spying. this has been something, I mean, the Bank Secrecy Act in the US basically says you have no secrecy when you're banking. They've continued that over the decades. What do you make about what's going on right now with that, just in terms of crypto, but also just in terms of the general public who have money in banks?
Well, I think, again, we can see this trend towards authoritarianism or totalitarianism. And so at these late stages of empires, we see them, impose capital controls. That's typically one of the last stages. And so they're just trying to grasp even harder. And unfortunately, we're seeing that more evident than anywhere. Everywhere we look, it's really a full court press against your freedom. Not just financially, but almost every area of your life. But to the money, yeah. I mean, in the United States, they're trying to put this minimum global tax in, so there's nowhere to go in the world you can get away from taxes. They're trying to spy on every single transaction in bank accounts over $600, and so they're continuing to squeeze. Will they get Puerto Rico next? Probably. I would imagine in the United States specifically. I mean, they're coming for everything you have, in my opinion. They want to tax your unearned wealth. They want to tax unearned income, et cetera. And so they want to really tax transferring wealth from generation to generation. And so I think they're going to continue to squeeze on that and extract taxes. And so Puerto Rico's good for now, but there's probably going to be somewhere else to go next, I guess.
What do you do if that happens? Do you leave Puerto Rico?
Well, I think, again, like I said earlier, like everybody has to kind of understand what are the important factors for them to optimize for. For me personally, over the last year, I've really realized that for me personally, freedom sits at the top of that value stack, above financial freedom. So right now I'm kind of optimizing. A lot of times people would ask other successful people, like, how do you find the balance? And I said, well, I don't believe that life is always about being in balance. Life is about being out of balance in different things. Like, for example, I have this big project. I'm working 80-hour weeks right now. But then that subsides, and I'll get back to my health or my family or whatever. Right now, I'm really optimizing for tax efficiency, capital efficiency. And I might have to go somewhere later where I can optimize more for freedom. And that would be my highest goal. And so I guess if I was leaving Puerto Rico, the thing that would drive me out of here would be a limit of my freedom. And then I would go to somewhere that has more freedom. Where would that go? I mean, given the kind of restrictions that we have today, Mexico's looking pretty attractive, and I'm actually building a house down there right now.
Where in Mexico is the house?
It's north of Cabo, down in Baja Sur.
Beautiful. So, yeah, I mean, you look at, what people have been saying the last year and a half is, hey, the U.S. isn't the worst of the lot. Perhaps it's not the best, but it's not the worst. That's what people are saying. People have looked at U.S. citizenship as perhaps somewhat of an asset. I think it's an asset that should be hedged against, for sure. But with the regulations, the ones that you're talking about, and many others that are going to impose on people's freedoms, do you see U.S. citizenship as an asset? Is that a place where you believe in the years to come you can go and keep that freedom?
Wow, Andrew, that's a big question. As an American, as a born American, what's interesting is that, to your point, yes, it's still probably better than most of the world. But there's something in the human psyche about hope and growth. And so what's unfortunate is that while, yes, America is still probably the best, we're watching it trend down. And that is very depressing versus going to El Salvador, which is nowhere near as good as America is today, but there's this air of hope. There's this air of growth. And it's like you want to be part of something growing to hope, not going the other way. And so that's an interesting piece. I hope that America will change its course, but unfortunately I feel that it still has a long way to trend down before that course probably gets redirected. And so, I think having an American passport, pre-COVID was the best passport to have, and then quickly we found out it was probably the worst passport to have. I think because I understand, I've been doing this, I have this big thesis of these 3 revolutionary cycles that are converging right now. And the thesis shows that this decade will be massive change. By the end of the decade, I believe we'll see the end of the giant nation state as we know it. And I think, how do we get from here to there? It's going to be pretty dangerous and tricky. And the key is going to be mobile, to be able to move around, because we don't know. And so the more options you can have would be the better. And so if you're only holding the American passport, as we found out, it could end up being bad. And so it's probably still an asset, but just like assets, you don't want all your money into one asset, you want multiple assets. And so I think having that flexibility to move around with multiple passports is probably very key.
Mark Moss says, if you're an American, Maybe you hold on to that, especially if you're optimizing for freedom over tax efficiency, or if you're willing to go to Puerto Rico to optimize for tax efficiency, but don't keep only the U.S. passport. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, just I'm an investor. I wouldn't put all my money into one stock, and why would I, have my whole life dependent on one asset? I wouldn't. Which that one asset right now, to your point, being an American passport.
What do you make of El Salvador? By the way, excellent passport. Nobody really knows that, other than the fact that you can't go to the United States without a visa as a Salvadorian. You can go pretty much everywhere else. What do you make of what's happening on the ground in El Salvador with Bitcoin and everything else?
Yeah, so I've been doing some work down there. I've been going down there for years surfing. It's when it comes to infrastructure and things like that, which are important to a lot of people, it's very low. I think it's ranked 107 on GDP, and so it's one of the more poor countries I've traveled to. The people are great. The infrastructure is not super great compared to some other countries, but it's kind of on the equator. The weather's awesome. The surf's awesome. The coast is like this really rugged coast. It's a place that I could go, but it's probably a place not most people could go. But like I was saying earlier, there's this air of hope where they see this growth and all these things are happening. I really like what the President Bukele has done down there by making Bitcoin legal tender. Obviously, there's always going to be somebody on either side that can find something wrong with it. They say that he's forcing people onto this, which he's not. He's made it legal tender, which means that businesses have to allow people to pay in Bitcoin, but the business doesn't have to receive Bitcoin. They can still receive US dollars if they want. It can be instantly converted. So they have to allow people to pay. They don't have to accept it. If they don't want, they don't have to hold it. But I think giving people more options and more choices is a good thing, not a negative.
People say he's a dictator sometimes. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I've heard a lot about this, especially as this whole Bitcoin thing's come up. And I've tried to pay attention a little bit, but honestly, I'm not an expert in El Salvadorian politics, nor do I really care to be an expert in any politics at this point. What I do like to remind people, though, is that there are a lot of rumors. Maybe he's a dictator. Maybe he's trying to push people out of the government. He wants to, have this unlimited reign in there. Maybe he wants to use Bitcoin for nefarious reasons to steal money or whatever it may be. The one thing I do want to recommend or just remind people is that Bitcoin is just a neutral tool. It's apolitical. It doesn't have a political side. It's a tool. Could it be used for bad? Certainly. Could it be used for good? Certainly. But don't attach whatever he may or may not be doing. Is he a dictator or not? To Bitcoin specifically. But from what I've seen so far, it seems like he's doing some pretty good things from an American standpoint.
Maybe you want a guy who does some good things to stick around for a while. Sometimes you see people who make tremendous reforms, then they got to go, and the next person drops the ball. It's very interesting how people see things through this very Western lens at times.
Well, I think there's something to be said about monarchies, for example. So like when you look at forms of government, monarchies are a little bit different where they do stay in power their whole life. The thing with a monarchy, though, is that they have skin in the game, right? That's their country. They're passing it down to their heirs. And if they screw up bad enough, they'll ruin their country. They'll get out of power. They'll lose everything. So there's like that accountability versus kind of like Western politics where there's zero accountability. And so there's no feedback loop on that. I think, depending on it's almost like maybe a dictator still kind of in that Western kind of political regime where they don't have full accountability could be a problem. But a dictator more like a monarchy, in some cases that works pretty good.
Certainly some case studies of that around the world. Do you feel safe in El Salvador?
Yeah, I feel safe. So I've been down there a couple times. Just like anywhere, just like any country, of course, there's unsafe areas. Coming from Southern California, I'm about 45 minutes from LA, Los Angeles, and you have Beverly Hills and Santa Monica, some of the best areas, and then you have Compton and Watts, where people get shot in broad daylight. And then 45 miles away is Irvine, which is the safest city in the United States. So that's all within a 45-mile radius. So I think it's important to understand you can't just blanket statement any country like that. But I've been down there multiple times, and I've felt safe. I haven't had any problems. I think, I think you do have to understand there's poor people down there. Very, very, very poor people. And so if you're going to be rich and flashy and careless, potentially people may want to rob you. I've seen that all through Central America and Mexico. But to your question, I have not felt unsafe there at all.
Yeah, Latin America is not Dubai. It's not Singapore where you're flashing a Rolex and all that.
No, and I like that. I like the ability to take down a couple pairs of surf trunks and a couple T-shirts, and you can just kind of like wear the same thing every day, and life is very easy. There's no trying to keep up with the Joneses. There's no trying to have anything flashy. I like that. If you're the kind of guy that wants to drive a Ferrari everywhere you go, then El Salvador may not be for you.
You can meet some of the wealthiest people in Mexico. They're not going to drive a Ferrari because they're keeping low key. And I'm looking forward to going back to Latin America in the near future here. But when I left last time, it's like, it's not a luxury area when you compare it to Asia, when you compare it to the Middle East. I mean, if you're looking for luxury, it's not the place. But I would suggest, you can tell me what you think about this, when you have places that are just super developed. I was in Chile about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. I mean, that place looks like it's Vancouver, Canada, in parts of Santiago. Everything just works so perfectly, and yet what do you get? Fewer freedoms than you probably have on a soft level in El Salvador, where the beaches, as you say, are just kind of rugged. It's not perfect, but I would argue you probably get left alone more, no?
Yeah, and so that goes back to kind of like finding out what's important to you and trying to optimize for that. Definitely El Salvador is on the poorer side, as I said, and yeah, you do pretty much get left alone. Costa Rica is up from that. Costa Rica has a lot of good development. The capital, San Jose, has attracted a lot of Fortune 500 companies there. So there's a higher level of education and jobs, and the city's nice. But then you can still get out to the beaches, which are very rugged, and again, be left alone. So Costa Rica is definitely a few steps up above that. El Salvador is more rugged, and you could just post up with a hammock and fish and surf all day, and life could be really good. And I heard now they have, and you would probably know better than me, but in El Salvador with Bukele, I think if you invest 3 Bitcoins of investment, you get citizenship, or not citizenship.
Permanent residence.
Permanent residency, yeah.
So it was kind of hastily put together. It needs to be clarified, but it's interesting seeing other countries doing that. Let's go to the other spectrum, though. What do you make of what's happening in Australia?
Man, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to see what's happening in Australia. They are trying to show the world the shining example of how totalitarian they can get without people reaching their breaking point and pushing back. And unfortunately, we're starting to see where that breaking point is. Unfortunately, like I said, as these nation states start collapsing, they start trying to squeeze people. And what's happening is equal and opposite reaction, right? The more they squeeze, the more it's pushing back. And unfortunately, man, I have a lot of friends, being a surfer, a lot of friends from Australia, and it is a bad situation. We can see, well, it's hard to see because the media won't cover it, but on social media, you can see that the people in Australia, specifically down in Melbourne and whatnot, they are pushing back in a very difficult way. But Australia won't learn from this.
Why do you say they won't learn from it?
Well, they're obviously not. Like, the more that people are pushing back, the more they're just cranking down, right? And so typically you would go, and we've seen this in the UK, for example. The UK rolled back their quote-unquote freedom pass, we can use that word, and they said, we're not going to do it now, right? Because the people were literally in the streets marching, millions of people throughout London, et cetera, and they said, hey, we're not going to do it. But not in Australia. They said, okay, fine, then you can't come outside, and things like that. And so instead of letting up like UK, which is what you would think, hey, the people have spoken, they've told us what they want, they just keep doubling down on policies that aren't working.
Why do you think one doubles down and one eases up?
That's a great question. It goes back to kind of the talk I said about like the whole monarchy situation and the problem that we have with Western politics is there's just no accountability there. And unfortunately, almost all governments, different policies are different, but they almost all do bad policies that don't work, and then continue to double down and do them even more when they don't work. No homeowner or family person that runs a family or runs a business would ever do that because we'd go broke and we'd go out of business.
If it doesn't work, you've got to change course. But these people, they get rewarded for their stupidity in anything, not just this, but in anything. It doesn't work, we need more of it, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And why does the UK pull back a little bit and Australia doubles down a little bit? I don't know. I mean, if I was going to speculate, I guess just the little bit differences in the leadership sees that differences. I unfortunately, I think a lot of this is, like I said, a testing ground for bringing it to the rest of the world. It's basically trying to bring what's happening in China west. And maybe Australia is just that first point that it comes west. The policies in regards to the Freedom Pass and social credit scores and surveillance state, et cetera. And so maybe Australia, being that test ground, is not letting up to kind of show the rest of the world what happens if they don't let up. But I have a lot of friends on the ground there, and I can tell you from their conversations with me, it's about to explode down there. That's what they're saying. So it's a dangerous situation, and it's a sad situation.
I always thought, I was in Australia a couple of years ago, and I said, I mean, from traveling all around the world, the U.S., to me, on a soft level, has some of the lowest levels of freedom that you'll find. And I said, Australia, this is substantially worse, just in terms of you can't even opt out of anything. Yeah. And so I said, if somewhere beats the U.S., this is it. Perhaps the idea is proximity. I mean, the U.S., you have Canada, you have Mexico, which many people up until recently have kind of poo-pooed. Australia's out there in the middle of the ocean. I mean, to me, I wonder if just being left alone to your own devices allows these people to say, hey, this is pretty normal, rather than being in Europe and having these comparison points. I mean, it seems odd in the information age that would be the case, but I wonder if there's a certain isolation involved.
Well, there is a certain isolation involved, and one of those isolations are the fact that people aren't allowed to leave the country, which is insane. I have many friends in Australia, and this summer, now that kind of things have opened up, we've been doing conferences and business meetings again, and they are not allowed to leave their country. One of my friends is a very well-known podcaster, business consultant, had legit business to do here at these conferences, and he filed, I think, 3 or 4 times, and they just would not allow him to even leave his own country. And I don't get that. I mean, I can understand if they're scared of people getting sick, that they could say, hey, you're not allowed to come back. I can understand that. If you leave, you can't come back.
Also pretty ridiculous, by the way.
No, that's ridiculous, but at least there's a little bit of rational thought there. But what good excuse does a country have for not allowing you to leave?
We don't want you to sully our image, I guess. We don't want Australians to be the reason for yeah.
The one thing that I would say in regards to why, in my opinion, why America is trending way slower towards authoritarianism than what we see happening in Australia, or maybe it's just softer in your words, is the Second Amendment, and I think that's a big piece. And throughout the years, I've talked about throughout history. And history's there if anybody wants to read it, but throughout history, hundreds of millions of people have died. And usually when a nation has taken away the people's right to bear arms, tyranny and death follows that, unfortunately. And everybody would always use Australia as an example. Well, Australia did, and look what happened. Nothing happened there. And it was always the example that they would use to show that wasn't the case. And today what we're seeing only proves that case even that much more.
Do you think that when you say this could be rolled out to the rest of the world, do you think that you look at a country like El Salvador, they have the means, the desire, the ability to roll out the same kind of stuff that you're seeing in the U.S. and Australia? I think people make that comparison, and my thought is, sure, it'll be like bank information sharing. It'll be like so many other provisions, the OECD. 40 or 50 countries do it. I have a hard time believing the El Salvadors of the world are going to get around to doing that in short order. Do you?
You're absolutely right, Andrew, and that is the piece about competition. And so those will be the places that we can go. And unfortunately, we'll probably have to go accept a lower quality of life because in the developed nations, they will have a much easier time installing these freedom passes on your phone, which I believe is the ultimate goal. It's not about whatever this is about right now. The ultimate goal is about trying to get your whole life into one switch, where you basically have this app that controls everything from your central bank digital currencies, your money, to your health, to your global ID, etc. And in those countries, to your point, in El Salvador, most people don't even have a smartphone. A lot of those areas don't even have internet. So there's no way they can do that. And so unfortunately, I'm sort of kind of prepared, and most people probably should be, if freedom is your number one priority, that moving to those types of places will probably be where you'll need to go because, to your point, yeah, they'll have a very difficult time. People don't have smartphones.
I think, when you use the word, just as an example in this situation, you look at lockdowns. There's a different meaning in a lot of places. What Australia's doing, and then you go to places like Turkey, you come to where I'm at here in Belgrade. I just drove around Serbia this weekend. These people are not going to put up with stuff that's happening in Australia. And they're not even putting up with it now. Everything is life as usual. You go to a lot of places in this part of the world, in Central America. It's just a totally different thing. To me, the culture is the first step where people in Australia have, for the longest time, said, we like having lots of restrictions.
Yeah, it is that proverbial frog in the pot of boiling water, so to speak. And to your point, yes, Australia has been trending this way for a really long time. It's been scary to see what they've been doing. And what I do like about Eastern Europe, where you're at right now, is that they've recently come out of communism. They do not want to go back because they see what that is. Now, I'm old enough to have kind of grown up under this Cold War, Berlin Wall era. Both of those collapsed when I was in high school. And so I grew up studying that. I was taught what was going on over there. I remember as a kid being afraid, oh my gosh, what if I was at my friend's house spending the night and they put the wall up, Berlin Wall up, and I couldn't get back home? That was like a legit fear that I had as a kid. And so I saw that in Europe, in Eastern Europe. Again, they have that recent history, but in Australia, they don't. Schools, and even in the United States, schools don't teach that anymore. Now kids think that they want that. What was interesting, back to that story, is that was a legit fear that I had as a kid. I was like, oh my gosh, because they put the wall up pretty quick. I'm like, what if I was on the wrong side? I couldn't get home. And then I saw on Father's Day in Australia, it was a couple weeks ago, a month ago, they literally put up a wall in the city, and families were meeting on the wall, and they were hugging their fathers across the wall, passing gifts because they couldn't get across the wall. And I just was completely blown away out of my mind.
The fear in many of these emerging countries that people say, and why people move to cities, is because they say in the village that education is bad, and they blame in part politicians on wanting to retain power by having uneducated people. And yet you look at the United States, for example, it has some of the lowest education scores in the Western world. Are people really being educated there about what's actually happening? Because people are now voting for the AOCs of the world. That's who they're bringing in.
Well, the answer is absolutely not. And the problem that we have with school is, first of all, go back to the origins of school and look what school was designed for, and that will kind of help you understand what's the problem today. But the big problem is that what do people need to be educated in? That's a good question. What they're being educated in, I think, probably past 6th, 7th grade, you've learned what you need to learn. You've learned how to read, write, do arithmetic, math, etc. But they're not being taught to think. They're being told what to think. They're being told to memorize and recite. As a matter of fact, we see this on memes. I saw a meme yesterday on Twitter, and even magazines have run front page. Do not do your own research, they tell you. And
just follow.
People are dying because they're not obeying what the government says. And so they're literally, school takes that creativity, takes that critical thinking away from you. And it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast, and it was with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which is what a lot of marketing people use. And it's a way you can kind of hypnotize people, get things to go through from the conscious to the subconscious. And it's a certain way that you talk, certain way you say things. And they have these practitioners, and they have these like master certified practitioners who are on the podcast. And they were talking about how the media in the United States was using NLP techniques to literally hypnotize or brainwash the people. Like literally. That's why people recite these mantras that they don't have any factual basis for. And what they said is that it's only gotten easier and easier because the people are getting more dumb and more dumb. The school is teaching people just to take in information and accept it without thinking about it. And that just makes the programming that much easier.
People, again, from Eastern Europe will say our media, that's what they do. It's all propaganda. I was on a show in Eastern Europe a number of years ago. The person literally told me, we don't do anything truthful here. This is all propaganda. They said it to my face off the camera. Is it really that much different anymore between the West and these countries? I know you're not supposed to say that.
It's not, but people still think it is. And so I haven't done near the travel that you have. Most of the stuff I do is in remote surf places. But I did talk to somebody from China, and they kind of said the same thing, which is, why is everybody watching the news? Everybody in China knows the news is just propaganda. We don't watch that. But in the United States, I think most people still are glued to CNN, and anything they say is absolute truth. And actually, there's another study that came out. It was actually Jordan Peterson, and he was talking about how I think Democrats see that I think they think the death rate is like 50%, where the Republicans think it's like 10%. That's literally the difference because of where they get their news sources from. So that was pretty interesting. I was just at a conference yesterday. I saw Tony Robbins. It was Saturday. I saw Tony Robbins speak, and he was saying he was throwing out stats, and he said, the number one group of people that are hesitant about these policies, we'll call it that, are PhDs, not MBAs, because they're just taught to recite, memorize and recite, but PhDs, because PhDs have to come up with their own theories, and they can think outside. And so it just kind of illustrates the difference of where you get your news, obviously, and the difference of just memorizing and reciting versus thinking for yourself.
This is your voting class. But to China, you said China, or you perhaps shared, China banning Bitcoin shows that they're afraid of Bitcoin. They've banned it again. Why do you think that is? Why is China doing this? I suppose they're a legacy brand, just like the U.S.
What I love is that I think this is like the 7th official time that China has actually banned it, maybe the 7th or 8th. And if it didn't work the first time or the second time or the third time or the fourth time or the fifth time or the 6th time or the 7th time, like what makes you think it's going to work now? And again, back to just kind of those late stages of a country, right? It's that capital control. The more they're losing, the more they try to hold power. And so to ban anything shows that they're afraid of it. The fact that they haven't do it 7, 8 times shows they can't do it. But what's interesting is, if the government tells you, hey, don't do drugs, that doesn't make you want to go do drugs. But when the government tells you, you don't have the right to store your wealth in a way that we can't confiscate and steal it from you, well, shoot, that makes me want to go do that. Right? Just like we see in the U.S. every time they talk about taking guns away, gun sales go up. And so that's what's happening in China. I think the more they try to crack down and the more incompetent they look, and this is what's really happening, this is an interesting trend. In the United States, or in Europe, they said that the ECB said they want to ban anonymous crypto wallets. Okay. Good luck, because I could literally create like 100 million while I'm talking to you right now. They're digital. And the more that we see these digital technologies like Bitcoin and technologies built on Bitcoin, I think we'll see governments continue to try to crack down on them, but it's only going to make them continue to look more incompetent and more useless. And I think it's going to be this interesting contrast to watch.
Isn't the benefit of China, of Russia, perhaps even El Salvador, is that we don't trust the media? We don't trust the government. We're not going to wait for their cue. We don't think our passport's the best. Isn't that, in a sense, an advantage that they have, whereas what we call the legacy brand countries have people lulled into a sense of security? And that's why perhaps they don't want to take advantage of competition, because they don't think they need it.
Well, they don't need it, right? They're the pretty girl at the ball, the pretty girl at the dance, and so they can be mean and rude or whatever, right? And so that's exactly the stance of California, unfortunately, and it's actually come out of the governor's mouth, right? Like our weather.
Where are you going to go?
Our weather is so good, right? Our stuff is so good, people will just deal with it. And the honest truth is, Andrew, it's worth a lot. California is so good. It's worth paying a lot of money for. But everything has its breaking point.
Adam Carolla made a comment a number of years ago. This is like the hot blonde. California is the hot blonde. You're not the hot blonde. That lasts for a while. You're not the hot blonde forever. Don't people eventually realize there is Puerto Rico, there is Chile, there's a lot of places, Bali. Aren't there a lot of alternatives? That to me is what the isolation speaks to. There are so many places like California.
Well, Adam Carolla, the rest of that comment was, yes, I heard that comment. He said, but now it's like the hot girl that used to be the hot girl, and now she's 40 or 50 years old. I think it was this.
And like clinging to it.
Yeah, because now California has, because they're draconian measures, they've kicked Hollywood out. They're now the number 4th state in the United States for movie production. They're number 4, not number 1. They've kicked Silicon Valley out. Most of Silicon Valley is gone. They have the highest income per taxes and whatnot, but yet they're the most bankrupt. They have the highest homelessness rate, worst education system, and so they're now they're the old girl that used to be the hot girl at the dance. And so, like I said, everyone just has their breaking point. They want to take their state taxes up to 18% now. And now they want to, say that if you leave, you owe taxes for 5 years. If you sell your house and leave, there's an exit tax. And the more they do this, the more they just push people away. Like myself, you finally find your breaking point.
10 years, I think.
Or 10 years, yeah. I've heard different things, but yeah.
I think even if you look at it from the dating standpoint, let's just take that. I say to myself, if you can't find people who are a pleasure to be with, why wouldn't you just go somewhere else? Why would anybody tolerate, whether it's in a personal relationship or in just a government relationship, this lack of competition? Because to me, those are the two areas where people tolerate a lack of competition. If you go to a bad restaurant, you don't say, well, I guess this is just what it is.
Well, I can give you some actual reasons because I'm actually living it right now. And so I'm in a situation right now where I have kids and my daughter's in high school. And she hasn't been able to make new friends very easy. And you also look at you have a teenage daughter and you're in wherever third world country, El Salvador, and you look around and like, do I want my 17-year-old daughter to find her next husband here living in the jungle? You know, so there's things like that cause you to reconsider those types of things. You know, would it be, can I just go back and suck it up for one more year so she can finish her high school, move out and go to college, and then I'll go back to those countries, kind of a thing. And so there's all different types of circumstances for all different types of people. But having the kids, especially older kids, when the kids are younger, it's different. But as the kids get older and you're trying to move, that's been one thing that's really affected, you know, my decision.
Something to think about if you're going into having kids, I imagine. How do you build around that? Well,
I think, like I said, when the kids are younger, they can adapt to almost anything. But as they get older and you're trying to do it, it becomes a little bit more difficult.
Lastly, you said it's going to be harder for the safety people to get along with the freedom people. You are in between two places. You've got the freedom people going to Puerto Rico. You've got the safety people in California. What does that say to the future of a country like the United States, where these two very divergent camps are increasingly at odds with each other?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've kind of come to the realization that the two sides, specifically in the United States, but really probably across the world, but in the United States, the two sides are just too far apart. I mean, it's just irreconcilable. And at this point, I don't see how there's any coming together. And the reason why is because the one side, the non-freedom camp, the tyranny camp, the freedom camp is like, hey, live and let live. This is my approach. Live and let live. Hey, Andrew, you do you. I'm going to do me. Like, we have different views. We're cool. Like, we can still be friends. The problem is, I had this conversation just last weekend. The problem is when you want to tell me what to do and you want to force me what to do, that's when we have a problem. And so that's kind of where that side has gone, where we have cancel culture, right? You can't say anything. And we're just so far apart. There's no tolerance from that side. They're saying, if you don't take this, whatever, you know what I mean? If you don't take this, then you should die. I hope you die. You can't go to the hospital. And like, they're just like, nobody on the other side is like, well, you took it. I hope you die. Like, and so there's no tolerance left. And unfortunately,
do you think there's tolerance from the because I'm in the freedom camp. Do you think there's full tolerance? I mean, there's certainly people who, if you're not 100% crypto, you know, they want you to, you know, be poor. There's certainly, I mean, don't you think there are some people
yeah, in the Bitcoin camp, there's the have fun staying poor kind of a thing.
You have to admit, I mean, certainly being in favor of freedom is a positive thing, but some people, you know, in my experience, you know, perhaps they take it too far.
They do take it too far, and that's just kind of a sign of the culture, right? But I think even the Bitcoiner that may say have fun staying poor, that's still, hey, good luck, that's your choice, have fun with it.
Yeah, there's a certain I would imagine, I don't know if desperation is the word, of having to even say it. You know, I mean, it's like people who come to our business, come to your business, I imagine as well, who've got to be vocal about like, well, that's not why we're not working. Listen, you know, if I don't want to work with someone or work with their business, I just don't go to their business. I don't stage a protest outside.
Right, exactly.
There's a certain point about moving on, and I would say go where you're treated best is about just enjoying your life and being at peace in your life, no?
Well, definitely, and that is the ultimate piece, is like be at peace in your own life. And so again, different people have those different things that lead to that. Some feel better at peace when 50 or 60% of their wealth isn't stolen away and used by a regime they don't agree with, which is kind of where I'm at after seeing what happened to Afghanistan. I'm like, wow, how can I give them any money anymore?
Aren't you glad you're not paying for that?
How can I, like, I'm literally giving money to build my own prison. Like, how can I do that? Like, there's no moral way for me to do that. So maybe that's peace for some people, or some people for peace, it's just being able to live on the beach and be left alone, right? And so everybody kind of has those different thresholds, I think.
One Mark Moss, the number one, markmoss.com, that's the website, I believe. You've got a great training up about the 3 different cycles. Where do we find you?
Yeah, the best way to find me is just go to links.onemarkmoss.com. And you'll find the training. You'll find you know, all the ways to follow me. I'm pretty active on Twitter, which is the One Mark Moss as well. So if you want to at me there and send me a question, I'm happy to answer it.
Big on YouTube, big on Twitter, great stuff. Mark Moss, pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks so much, Andrew. It was a pleasure.
Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalists personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.